Hello, and welcome to Leadership Table Talk, a show designed to help you develop and improve your leadership skills and talents. I'm your host, Dr. Mary Gillam. A few months ago, we celebrated Black History Month. During that time, I had the distinct pleasure of meeting someone who would change the narrative when it comes to writing poetry that underscores the power of hope, the vigilance of love, and the necessity of perseverance. His poetry is truly thought-provoking. So please help me to welcome local poet and author of How Deep Is Drowning, Timid Masses. Timid, welcome to the show.
Oh, thank you, Dr. Gillam. I appreciate you having me.
You're welcome. So Timid, let's just begin by just telling the audience a little about your background.
Well, I'm a homegrown product of the Tidewater, Virginia area.
Yes.
Grew up in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Shortly after graduating high school, went into the service, served in the Army for several years. And then when I came out of the Army, I went to work here in the Northern Virginia area as a federal employee. So that's kind of been my roadmap to where I'm at today.
Yes. I remember in reading the book that you actually grew up in some very humbling conditions. Can you kind of talk about how that shaped the person that you are today?
Well, first of all, I grew up as the youngest of six.
Yes.
So anytime you're the youngest, you're always going to get the picked on. You're always going to be the one at the bottom. But it helped me, it formed me, and shaped me into what I am. But I have four sisters and a brother. My brother's the oldest, I'm the youngest, and my parents. My father was a janitor,
Yes.
My mother a bus driver. And I think what I observed over the years is watching them scrape through and make a living out of nothing, facing the hardships that they did. And from that, it taught me to appreciate what you have.
Yes.
I think too often we think about what we don't have and what we want and the materialism that we pursue. But it taught me, again, to be thankful for what I have and to dwell where I'm at, to just focus on making the best of that.
Yes, absolutely. I noticed that you write using a pen name, because Timid is not your real name. So what made you decide to do that, to write using a pen name?
It was a long process to get there. I think I tried several names, and some of them I wouldn't even want to tell you about. But I think the way that it came to settle in on Timid Masses was I felt like that really represented the message that I wanted to get across. To me, it represented my personal crossing from someone who shuttered their voice to someone who was opening up and sharing what they had to share with the world.
Yes, oh, wonderful. You wrote the official poem for the Buffalo Soldiers Monument at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. I've been there. And it was used in the ceremonial book by McDonald's in their ad. Can you just kind of describe what that honor was like to have been selected to do such an outstanding task?
Tremendous honor, unexpected, very, very fortuitous how I came across that, because it started out, believe it or not, as a fundraising effort. So I was working at the hospital on the post, and I was putting together the celebration for the Black History Month. And along with some other friends, we came up with the idea, you may not be aware, but Leavenworth is where the Buffalo Soldiers were first formed.
Wow. Okay,
and so there
that.
still were several that were living in and around the area at that time. And so we wanted to bring them in as part of the Black History Month celebration, but we wanted people to walk away with something. Thus my friend was an artist, I was the poet, we put together a poster and we had the Buffalo Soldiers sign it. The committee saw it and were so blown away. I think we raised over $2,000 in a matter of minutes, or a matter of hours, not minutes, but a matter of hours. And they were so blown away with our effort that they adopted it over and asked me to do the same on a regular basis. So the poem morphed out of that initial poster. They put their official heading on it, and then it became the official poster of the Monument Committee. And I would be in charge of taking the soldiers around, the original Buffalo Soldiers, taking them around and having them sign the posters and raising funds for the committee effort.
What an amazing story. Now, do you have that poem by chance?
I have it in my head.
Okay.
And I still have copies of the poem. Yeah, I still have it.
Can you recite maybe a couple of words or from it?
I will do my best.
Okay.
It starts out saying, many sunsets ago I stood upon these grounds as the sound of revelry rushed through my veins, erect and still. The wind crackled through my hair as reveries danced through my mind. I wondered, what will the future be like? Who will the heroes be when the history of this era is written? My mind receded to the dry, parched earth of the Rio Grande, where we patrolled over the Catay and Mesquite, then faded to the Sierra Bonitas and San Juan Hill. Through the telescope of time, I saw the future battles, World War I, World War II, and Korea. And then I wondered, when the final pages of history are written, will they remember me? Will they remember my dedication and valor? And so the poem was an attempt to look at history from the perspective of as if I was one of those Buffalo soldiers standing there on that hallowed ground, you know, being dutiful and wondering if me carrying out that duty is going to be remembered, you know, down the road. And so that's how I tried to frame it, and what you heard is what came out of it.
What an awesome poem. It says, I love poetry. That was just amazing. Now, did you have to conduct a lot of research to do that?
I always try to do as much research as I can, you know, whether it's walking different sites, whether it's reading up on materials. Leavenworth, as you say, you've been there, is full and rich of history.
Yes, yes.
And so I was blessed to be at that location at that time.
So now let's transition and actually talk about this amazing book of yours, How Deep Is Drowning. What a interesting title. So can you kind of talk about how you came up with that, where that came from?
Well, I think similar to the name, How Deep Is Drowning took several evolutions as well. And again, I don't know if I want to share all of those evolutions, because some of them you might say, what were you thinking? But I think it started out as a poem, actually. I was going to write a poem, and oftentimes I write in the reverse. I think about the title. I might be inspired by a line or a word that I hear or that, you know, I read. And it started out, I think I was watching a documentary, and they were talking about drowning. And the question just popped in my head, well, how deep is drowning? And then I applied that to social issues and challenges that folks face. And so when you ask how deep is drowning, what we're really asking is how much is enough?
Yes, oh my God. Could you just expound on that just a little bit more, that it's so deep?
It's ironic because I just came from Atlanta this past weekend, and I had several conversations about it. And I would always, when I'm out and about and I'm, you know, doing my book signings or my vending, I start off by asking people that question. I say, can you answer the question for me? How deep is drowning? And I get all sorts of answers. And one thing that stood out to me is, as I was discussing it with different folks, I said that I guess how deep is drowning depends on what you're standing on. And, you know, if you're not standing on anything solid, it doesn't take much to give way and to go under.
Wow.
So I think, again, that title was developed to address the social issues.
Yes.
It was developed to raise and invoke a question in people's minds. When is enough enough? You know, how much can a person take, and does it differ? Is there a difference from person to person of what enough is?
Yes.
Yeah.
Now, has writing always been a part of your DNA? Did you always want to write?
Well, I think being the youngest, with the four sisters in between, it kind of left me out there by myself quite a bit, because the girls would do what the girls wanted to do. My brother was much older, and he was already out of the house. So I tended to develop a lot of activities that I could do by myself. And I think writing was one of those activities that I could definitely do by myself. So I took to writing at a very young age, and over the years my style has developed and matured into what it is today. And it's still evolving. It's always evolving.
Did you take like creative writing classes in high school or something like that? Or?
Not at all, believe it or not. Not only did I not take the creative writing classes, when I went to college, I went to school, and I got my master's in HR and my MBA.
Okay, yes.
And when I was pursuing my college degree, I didn't want to take any English courses, so I slept out of all of them. I tested out of them. So I guess I tend to not function well in that structure. I want the free thinking. I want to be able to create and be creative.
Oh, that is really interesting that you love to write, but in terms of actually taking that kind of a class, the creative writing class. So let me just ask, can you just kind of tell the audience what the book is all about, especially how deep it's running? Because I know you've written several books.
Correct.
And so that particular book, in terms of what they will get out of that book.
Well, I broke this book down to 3 chapters, and the intent was, as I said, one, it was my coming out party. Since I wrote the Buffalo Soldier poem back in the 90s, and I've always been writing. I always write. Even now, if you were to go through my phone, there's probably 100 poems that I've written that are not published on my phone. So I'm constantly writing. And I wanted to share. I got to a point in life where I said, it's time to share. So this book represented that first and foremost. And I broke this book down to 3 chapters. The first chapter being the underlying current. And the underlying current represents the harshness and the hardships that many of our ancestors had to endure initially coming to this country. The second chapter was called Treading Water. And the reason why I chose treading water was because when you're treading water, you're moving, but you're not really going anywhere. You're sustaining in place.
Yes.
And so there's a middle, I like to call it the middle passage. I know there's a middle passage of the voyage over, but I like to call it the middle passage of America, where after emancipation, we went into Jim Crow, we went into segregation, we went into civil rights, where we were fighting and fighting hard. But it seemed like for many that we weren't moving the needle very far. And then the third chapter was Gasping for Air. And I think Gasping for Air represents where we are today, and that we've put forth a lot of efforts. And if we don't continue to push and understand the value of perseverance, the value of enduring these hardships and making it through some of these issues that we face today, that it may be our last gasp for air.
So would you say, based off of what you just mentioned there, that the gap between the millennial generation in terms of what our ancestors went through and what people may understand today when you talk about perseverance, because there is a difference between what the young people today see and what people, maybe my age group, I won't say yours.
Our age group.
There's a difference in our perspective on things. So can you kind of talk a little bit, because I know you really do delve into the social aspect of things.
Well, I've always been an admirer of what the slave went through. I think there's no better symbol, there's no better depiction of strength under duress. You know, to persevere under those conditions when you go through the hardship that you go through in a day, only to wake up and go through more hardship. Whereas today, you know, some of the things that we're fighting for and that we're asking for and that we're taking action to, they couldn't imagine the luxuries that we have access to.
Yes.
And I think that we have to remember, as we talk about so many of these other issues that are popping up without becoming political.
Right.
You know, there's so many issues of whether it's race, whether it's, you know, gender, whatever the issue may be, there's so many challenges that we face. We have to remember that the perseverance is in our DNA and we can persevere through it all. But we just have to have that seed of faith.
Yes,
and we have to nurture
absolutely.
it, and we have to be willing to let it grow, and we have to recognize it. And I think that that's what I tried to do in this book, is go back to what our ancestors went through. And I want to say, you know, even though I focus mainly on the African American experience, I think the book is relevant to anyone.
Right.
Because I think all of history is entwined.
Right.
There's not an African American history and you know, Asian history, and it's all entwined. A ripple in the water causes waves everywhere.
Absolutely, yes. Could you kind of like maybe give the audience a taste of what's in there, maybe by sharing maybe a few of your poems, if you don't mind.
I would love to. But I'm old and I can't see, so I need glasses. So one of the first poems I want to give you one from each of the chapters.
Okay,
I think that would kind of give you an idea. And one of the first ones I actually wrote back when I was in high school. And it morphed over the years. And I picked it back up, which I often do is I'll pick back up and I'll revisit the poems and kind of give them a new twist, a modern day twist. So the title of this poem was called Black Orchids. And it started out, like I said, when I was in high school, and let me share with you what it says today. The season arrives, dormancy subsides, and flowers begin to awaken from their slumber. It's a hot, humid spring that brings the torrential rains, bowing petals and making roots tremble. Through strength and perseverance, the black orchid endures, but destruction and despair awaits. The community bonds in an ebony patch where orchids thrive in all colors, hues, and shapes. Admiring eyes passing by glance upon this ebony patch. Without saying a word, their hearts interred, they snatch one, then take another to have a match. Caught off guard, the patch is saddened by the trespass that happened. Their heads and hearts hang low. Hearing their weeps, the admirer speaks and says, "Don't worry, we'll nurture these flowers and help them grow." With those soothing words, the patch rejoiced, celebrating the admirer's honorable deed. The beauty of our orchids will be shared with the world. The patch asked, "How many more flowers will you need?" "One will never do, we must take two, or maybe 3 or 4, the admirer said. But their greed was too extreme. Conceiving a scheme, their thieving hands took the whole patch instead. The patch was plucked, uprooted, and stuffed into the gallows of a ship. From bow to stern, the flowers were stranded in hopes that they would survive the trip. Some endured the journey, while others withered and died. Those who did survive were segregated and divided, snatched from their mother's breast, forced into a state of duress. They arrived beaten, battered, and barely alive. Still, as the flowers were removed from the ship, with the warmth of the eastern sun grazing their lips, their thirst grew greater to be free, to be placed back in their communities. Strangers came from far away to see the flowers on display in hopes that they could claim one, take it home, cultivate it, and make it their own. One by one, the flowers were sold until only the fallen petals remained. Remnants of the souls exchanged, the lost names, and the lives forever changed.
Wow, what a fascinating poem. Let me ask you, what percentage of that did you write when you were in high school to have written a poem like that as a high school student?
But when it started out in high school, it was within the rotations of a world capped by snow-capped mountains, lies alone, one lonely ebony patch. And then from that ebony patch, I evolved into this. So it was more the ideal. I took it apart. There's little pieces. I would say it's probably maybe 30% remaining in here, but a good portion of it has been just reimagined, I guess, recreated.
Okay, so just to make sure we stay on top here, let me ask you this. If you could maybe share one more of your poems and so forth.
I will go to the last one, and this speaks to a current topic.
Okay.
And it's in the last chapter. It's called Gasping for Air, and it's called The Other Side of the Wall.
Okay.
It says, falling on his knees, he begs to be forgiven for the sin of simply living in darkened skin. Sun-kissed long ago before boundaries were drawn on paper maps, on tables laid flat outlining the world. A young nation created by migrants in search of a better life, escaping the strife of a monarch's reign. The heavy hand of the crown weighing down, pushing people to the brink of rebellious change. 13 colonies followed a star to a place far from their original home, to plant flowers upon Plymouth stone and declare a foreigner's land as their own. 13 years before, 3 ships came to claim they were the first to step foot on those shores, constantly ignoring God spared others to discover these shores before. Fast forward through the years, attempting to make sense of senseless fears that leave us crouching behind invisible lines, yelling disparaging remarks at others who wish to reside on our side of the paper boundary. What is so special on this side of the wall where migrants still fall victim to the sin of living in darkened skin? Has the welcome sign been removed because there are no more rooms, no vacancies at the American Inn?
Wow. What a thought-provoking poem. Wow, it is just so amazing. In your book, because you are such a social writer, what are some things that you want people to take away? What maybe 3 things that you would like for people to take away from reading your book?
Well, I think the number one thing is I want people to enjoy it.
Oh, that's always good.
That's the first thing. And I say that, kind of tongue in cheek, but having read so much poetry in my own lifetime, there were times when I really struggled with understanding the message. Yes, and I think poetry is so personal
right.
that I try and create what I consider word art, is what I call it.
Yeah, yes.
I try and create word art that speaks to a wide audience, that many people can get something from it. So that's number one. I think number 2, I want folks to understand that the message in here is not about hate, it's about love.
Right.
It's about persevering, it's about using love to overcome a lot of the challenges. And when I say love, it's first loving yourself, it's second loving others, and then it's loving those who you disagree with. And it's only by that touching and agreeing that you're going to come to a position and to a place where we can all move forward.
Can you expound on that last one, loving those that you may disagree with?
Well, I think the key is, for me, the key is all of us coming to a place at the same time. And I'll go back to my military experience for that, because as a leader, you're often charged with leading the formation and running them in the morning runs.
Right.
And I was always a person, I can't do it now, but I was always an 11-minute 2-mile. I could take off. I was like a gazelle. And I would take off and I would go running, and I would have the formation behind me, and I would see that people would straggle in, and people would, I might have 5 people finish with me, and then 10 more and 5 more. And I realized at some point that that wasn't leadership, that wasn't unity, that the real objective wasn't to show people what I know or how far I could go. It was for all of us to get to the finish line together.
Wow, yes.
So I think
absolutely.
When you talk about, loving yourself, loving others, and loving those you disagree with, the real victory is won when we all cross the finish line together.
Oh, that is, you said a mouthful there. That was so awesome. I noticed that you not only write poems, but when I met you and I purchased a couple, you did, you assign art to the poem. Can you kind of talk about that process, because it was so wonderful?
Well, the visual helps to invoke a feeling. And at least I would think that any writer, you want the reader to be invoked by what you write.
Yes.
You want them to be inspired.
Yes.
And I know that not everyone, is inspired by just reading. Some folks are very visual, and they need that visual to help them understand what the message is in the poem. So I try and pick strong graphic pictures to pair with my poetry in order to help bring that message home to folks.
Now, did you say you draw? Do you draw?
I draw, but not those pictures.
Okay, but you do draw.
Right, I have little art. I would say my son is the real artist in the family, not me.
Okay, okay. Does he help you from time to time?
No, that mixture doesn't quite work as well as I would like for it to. But
that is awesome. Let me see. Well, we talked about the art that I really, really enjoyed because of what I saw when I actually met you the first time. But as a writer, what advice would you pass on to new writers?
Stay true to your passion. As for me, of course, I want to write something that folks will like, and I hope they enjoy it. But that's not the measure of success for me. The measure of success for me is just being able to share it. There will always be critics. There will always be those who may not see eye to eye with the message that you're conveying,
Yes.
but that's okay. You know, if it was possible that you could write something that everyone got, I think it would have been written long ago. You know, so I'm not intimidated, nor am I turned off, and I would advise any new writer to take up that same kind of approach. Don't be turned off just because you get a critique. Use it to make your product better.
Oh, that's awesome. Now, in the last couple of minutes that we have here, a couple of seconds really, where can people find out more about you and your book?
Well, my book's on Amazon, so you can Google. If you Google Timid Masses, you're going to see pages on Google. So you can go to Amazon and purchase the books. There's also on Book Patch. The Book Patch is where I originally did it. There's a site called Frameous, Frameous. Words is all one word, by Timid Masses. That's my store where I do the posters and the graphic pictures at as well.
Okay, that's awesome.
And then, of course, there's timidmasses.com.
Oh, that is wonderful. Well, Timid, I want to thank you for taking the time to come and be on the show today. And I want to thank you, our listening audience, for watching our show. And we hope that you have been inspired and that you will check us out. And if you'd like to know more information about this show or others, please check out my website at www.executiveleadershipbiz.com. This is Dr. Gillam, and I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.